Evening to all of you who are joining us from Liberia, Ghana, and other parts of Africa, as well as our audiences in the United States. I am Reverend Banty Brownell. I am the founder and the executive director of the Women's Advocacy and Resource Center. And I want to thank you all for joining us this evening during our annual Ecumenical Forum on Gender-Based Violence. Thank you for sharing your time with us. We truly appreciate it. This evening, we are going to be talking about conversations on domestic violence and faith. And for those of you who don't know who we are the Women's Advocacy and Resource Center. We are a faith-based organization that focuses on engaging faith leaders on dealing with issues of gender-based violence. Before we start the forum this evening, I want to begin by giving a trigger warning. We will be discussing very sensitive and sometimes disturbing issues regarding violence against women, so please take care of yourself accordingly. UN Women reports that 243 million women and girls ages 15 through 19 experienced domestic and sexual violence before the pandemic. The increase in violence are significantly higher in Black populations, whether it be African-American populations or Africans in sub-Saharan African countries. The Berkeley Center for Religion and Peace and World Affairs noted that women in faith and Black and minority ethnic women communities stay with abusive partners for longer than women of the wider population. It points to spiritual abuse, whereby abusers and sometimes faith leaders use religion to persuade people to stay with an abusive partner. So this evening, we're going to be having a very engaging and transparent conversation about domestic violence and faith. How is faith used to perpetuate and to justify the abuse and mistreatment of women, as well as how faith leaders can play a significant role in the domestic violence prevention and response. This evening, we have 4 dynamic panelists that will share their insights on this issue, as well as talk about initiatives they're working on to end violence against women. But before we begin, I want to take a moment to remember a phenomenal woman and a giant in the area of education, religious leadership, and leadership development, human rights advocacy, women's empowerment, and the list go on. The beginning of October, we lost Reverend Dr. Keturah Cooper. She was a woman of substance, style, and spirit, the anointed and proud pastor and founder of the Empowerment Temple AME Church in Liberia, as well as the founder of Helping Our People Excel Hope, one of the premier organizations that work on issues of women's empowerment and gender-based violence in Liberia. On a personal note, she was also my pastor, my spiritual mentor, my friend, and also an advisor to the Women's Advocacy and Resource Center. The clip you just saw during the intro was from last year when she served as a panelist for our first annual Ecumenical Forum on gender-based violence. Her memory and her work will live on. So if we can just take out a moment to have a moment of silence for Reverend Dr. Keturah Cooper. Thank you. Our panelists this evening are Reverend Mrs. Bijoue Togoh Birch, and she is a peace and security practitioner with over 22 years of experience working in civil society, regional, and continental organizations. She is also an ordained minister of the AME Zion Church, Western West Africa Episcopal Area, East Ghana. Wonderful. Welcome, Reverend Birch. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
And then our next panelist is Reverend Lucinda Kent. She is the senior pastor at Van Buren United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. And she feels a particular calling and focus towards eliminating intimate partner violence through community action, advocacy, and engagement with faith leaders. She served as a panelist last year, and she was so gracious to accept our invitation to return and to share about the amazing work that she is doing the Baltimore Washington Conference in the United Methodist Church. Welcome, Reverend Kent.
Thank you, Reverend Brownell. Thank you so much.
And our next panelist is Johnny Ndebe. And he works with the Carter Center in Liberia. He works with traditional leaders of Liberia, and he is passionate about encouraging women in customary communities to serve in community leadership roles. This has led to an increase of female chiefs in Liberia. He is also passionate about human development through affordable healthcare, education, and agriculture. He believes in religious freedom and human dignity, and he is an ardent supporter of girls' education. My friend, Johnny. Johnny, welcome to this forum. Thank you so much for attending. Johnny, are you there? Can you hear me? Okay, I think Johnny is having some technical difficulties, so Johnny will join us later. And next we have Jackalyn L. Wilson. She is an author, an awareness speaker, a certified life recovery coach, a certified domestic and sexual violence advocate, and a certified in mental health first aid. In 2017, she founded RITE, Connections and Recovery, a company established to support women like herself and other women from diverse backgrounds who have been oppressed by domestic violence to get safety and rebuild their lives. Jackalyn, thank you so much for being here today and serving as a panelist. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. Reverend Mrs. Birch, I'm going to turn it over to you. Anything that I did not mention in your short bio, please feel free to introduce yourself and share a little bit more about yourself before you begin your presentation. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My name is Reverend Mrs. Bijoue Birch. Married to a Liberian, but I'm a Ghanaian. My name is a little bit strange because it's French, because I was born in Côte d'Ivoire. So I'm a bilingual, I speak French, English. And yes, you have said almost everything about me. Tonight is not about me. It's about what the Lord can use us to do tonight. I have a ministry with women, actually. And this topic is very, very important to me because I have seen domestic violence when I was a child. In that, my father was a reverend. So usually you have this kind of cases coming home. And as young as I was, I could see women with their eyes swollen, with their faces swollen, being led by their same husbands who beat them. And there was a particular case in which the man brought the woman with the face very much swollen and was telling my father he was going to beat her up to the extent that when he calls her, she will respond like a goat. And that really touched me. And I think I grew up in that kind of environment when I saw a lot of violence being meted against women. And the challenge for my father to weigh between saying, woman, go back with your husband, or woman, leave the home and seek for safety, or I will give you safety, I will give you shelter, or I will get somebody with whom you could go and stay with until we see to this, or if we need to go to the hospital. I could see the struggle, my father going through that kind of struggle for years. And it did really touch me, my heart. And when I started growing, when I left home, somehow I came across a lot of these cases. And the question I kept asking myself was, what is the role of the church? What is the role of religious institutions in preventing this kind of things that have been happening in homes? And when I'm talking about the role or the importance of either you are a pastor, either you are an imam, whatever religion you are in, what is the importance of your role, your importance in preventing this kind of things? As I would have wanted to see it when I was growing, I didn't really see it clearly. My father playing that role, though he did his best, but of course, you cannot blame him, as I would say. That's why I'm careful. It depends. I'm careful because first and foremost, there's a religious institution. It's fundamentally a place where people will seek refuge. It's a place where people know that they can come, especially women, and talk and say what is hurting, what is happening at home. And unfortunately, some of these same institutions promote domestic violence intentionally or unintentionally through their doctrines, through their lack of knowledge on the subject, through their indecision. And then the second reason why I am very, very careful about this one, I'm talking about it also, is the misinterpretation of abuses of the Holy Scriptures, sacred scriptures, for instance. So when I'm talking about domestic violence and talking about the role of the church in our setting, as we are talking about it now, I take these two things into consideration because a lot depends on this. You cannot just draw the conclusion that, yes, the church is supposed to be a place of refuge where all is supposed to be known. And then the right thing is supposed to be taught. Then the people who are in the church are supposed to understand. I think there's some kind of paradox in there for me that keeps beating my mind. But as I continue experiencing and getting into this and talking with the abusers as well as victims, I think I see the role as very, very important. I believe that religious institutions are important and they have this role to play. One, because as I said, they are the source of hope and inspiration. Number two is the fact that we as faith leaders, we play an important role, not only as guides or people that other people can confide in us, but we are actually like the voice of society. So when I mount the pulpit and I'm talking and I'm preaching, I'm the voice of God to the people. So we become so important to those who listen to us because we now guide them. And that is why I think the onus lies on us to be led by God, to be able to lead the people we are leading, to be able to be taught by God on this subject, to have a deeper understanding of it, to be able now to do that. Because I believe that the prevention itself of this is already set out in the scriptures, what we're supposed to do to be able to avert domestic violence. And domestic violence, of course, is a sin like any other sin. And Jesus has paid the price. He has actually tasted violence himself. So it is clear that it's not something that we can gloss over anymore as religious leaders, as faith leaders, as people who other people trust in. Now, let me quickly say that to be able to practically prove this importance that we play in the lives of thousands of people. I take myself as an example. I have a ministry online. I have a ministry person to person, and my voice touches a lot of people. So the question is I'm not the only one, other leaders as well. So how can we practically show this kind of importance that we have in preventing? When you are talking about prevention, you're talking about systems. So it is very, very important that systems, preventive systems, be set up. Just as we have different systems in the church, I think we should deliberately, intentionally set up preventive systems in the church. And we should be able to build the resilience. When you have the preventive systems, you are talking about teaching people about indicators of violence, for instance, and how to pick them out and how to respond to them. In order to respond to them, we need to build the resilience of the people as well by teaching them the word properly. That's why I said we need to be taught ourselves to understand. Then we'll be able to set this kind of systems in our various institutions. Number two, I think it is very, very important to be knowledgeable about domestic violence. I believe a lot of religious institutions have ideas, and it is very myopic. In the church, for instance, not deliberately do they talk about it. I believe because they do not know very well. Let me talk about my setting. Not many religious institutions know so much about domestic violence and openly talk about it as they should. And in order to do this, I think partnerships with other organizations between the church as an institution and NGOs, for instance, who know this is very important. And I also think it is important for the church to have a kind of resource center where people can easily lay hands on information on domestic violence and read about it and pose questions, seek clarification. If possible, set up teams of people that these people can be talking to. And I also think to practically show this importance or the role of the church, we need to be, as leaders, to be clear about confidentiality. Because when people confide and you listen, the next thing somebody is mounting a pulpit and is talking about it. So the confidentiality is no longer there, and women find it very difficult to come in. I think let me pause here. I'm sure my time is up. I'm sure I will come back. You will give me another opportunity to wrap up.
You will definitely. You will
now?
definitely come back. You have shared so much.
Okay.
Thank you for your insight. I mean, I loved what you talked about the partnerships between the churches and the NGOs that are working on these issues, and also the church serving as a resource center. Because that is extremely important, because the amount of power that religious leaders have, especially in cases in Africa, we have so much power over our congregants and so forth. So it's important to serve as a resource center to be able to provide people with the information and the help that they need. Thank you so much. We'll be engaging in conversation, all of the panelists, after everyone presents. So Johnny, you are up next.
Okay, so, from my end, I will say good evening. And to those of you in the US, I think it's good morning. And I want to say thank you for this very important conversation. It's quite interesting. Let me first state here that by me taking part, on this program, I'm now speaking for the Carter Center, because I work for the Carter Center. But whatever I see here should not be seen as a statement from the Carter Center. I'm here in my capacity as a private individual who has some insight about this conversation. Like I was invited by my sister Banti to be on the show. So let me come to this discussion from the point of a sociological perspective. society, every society has social institutions. And religion happens to become one of the social institutions that is part of every society. And the purpose or the function of religion is to bring about or to ensure spiritual healing, spiritual support for society. And another portion of this, another section of the social institution is the family. Sociology sees society into 5 different groupings. We have the family, we have the religion, we have the education, we have the economics, and we have the politics. So those 5 institutions are the ones that are responsible for the wholesome functioning of society. So when we come to discuss domestic violence, let's see how religion, family, and education can get connected, like a triangle, to address domestic violence. Meaning, if the religion is responsible for the spiritual understanding, spiritual healing, and the rest of society, who goes to the religious institutions for worship? Family members. Then the next issue is who goes to the educational institution for knowledge? It's also the family. So I think from my perspective, the family, the religion, and the education should be the first 3. Those 3 social institutions should be first working together to ensure that the fight against domestic violence is sustained. And domestic violence is not just seen from the perspective of violence against a woman, but it's also take another thing where it will be violence against the men. And those are psychosocial indications that tells you that a woman or a wife in the home or a woman will also be inflicting domestic violence onto her husband or her male counterpart through some psychological or psychosocial means. So I want to appreciate all our religious leaders on the show, the 4 of you in fact, and to start considering how the religious institutions are playing role to prevent or to expose in the domestic violence. Because the religion is the one also conducts, let's say for example, every church that is to conduct a marriage, no matter who marriage counseling, do they discuss domestic violence during the marriage counseling? Do they discuss with those 2 new couples what they should expect? How should they respond to situation in their home as it relates to domestic violence? Because domestic violence takes place in society among family members. Another issue also is sometimes you hear about some religious leaders also being perpetrators of domestic violence. I mean, that has been some, in the last few months in Morovia, for example, or in Liberia, was reported sometime back in Kakata where a church leader was reportedly, in the news that he beat on his wife, or he assaulted a lady in his church, one of the church members, and even another case where a church leader was accused of rape, for example, against one of his church members or one of those, female church, people in the community. So my presentation is, let us look at domestic violence from a societal point of view and how various social institutions can work towards preventing and ensuring the exposure if it happens in your community. Because if church leaders are not church necessarily, religious leaders, whether church or Muslim or Bauda or whatever religious group, if those leaders begin to cover up or do not speak against domestic violence, then where are we? And what I've come to also realize is that there are many churches now that are preaching or teaching mostly about miracles. Miracle will come tomorrow, miracle will come today, miracle will come for tomorrow. And I normally don't hear church leaders or Muslim leaders or preaching against domestic violence or even teaching domestic violence. Another aspect is at the school level, during educational institution, do they have in the curriculum a section where young students growing up either from the elementary level or the senior high or college level, what are they learning about living together as a family? What are the family values that are taught to kids in secondary schools? What is happening there? So I will not go too far, but just to introduce this section of the conversation so that as we discuss, we all can begin to look at the family, the religion, and the education. Those three social institutions should play a major role in addressing domestic violence, and also in the sense of preventing domestic violence or reducing domestic violence in society. So let me stop here so that we hear from our next panelist.
That was so good. When we started having this conversation, I'm going to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on the family aspect, because a lot of the work that you've done with the traditional elders, well, let me just share something. Johnny and I, we met the first time when I went to Liberia. I was working on my second master's with Emory University, focusing on gender justice and GBV. And so I was doing some qualitative research. And he was one of my bosses, actually, and Cora. And a lot of the things that we talked about also was how these situations are handled the family way, right? The family way, how instead of perpetrators being held accountable for their actions, they go to their family and manage to persuade the family to sweep it under the rug. So one of the things that you talked about was with the family, churches, and educational institutions working together. So I would like you to elaborate more on the family aspect of it, or the family responsibility aspect, in our context, in the Liberian context.
All right, thank you, Bandy. So currently, when we want to discuss the family with regard to Africa and looking at modern Africa and indigenous Africa from the perspective of cultural and customary practices, and also Africans now that have been Christianized or Westernized in a way of life. So you see that in Africa, for example, in Liberia, I will most of the time, categorize family into two. One of that is the customary setting of the family, and the Western and by extension, the Christian kind of family life. So you realize that within the customary setting, family values are not just between the two married couples. It's between the two families, and in fact, the family of the lady, the family of the man are all coming together. So this marriage is bringing a whole group of people together, and so to say, a generation coming together, where whatever happens in that home, it concerns everyone. Now, this is opposed to Western or Christianized marriage. It kind of saying like just the couples in that case are in that small laid box. They are responsible for what happens among themselves. I said they have some friends or other relatives that may intervene or make involved. So it sometimes seems to be like control in the Western or Christian family as compared to the customary family. And like I said, the customary family issues do not just sit between the husband and wife. It goes beyond husband and wife. It goes to the elders of the whole family. It goes to senior members of the family, and they get involved and kind of like address it. And customarily, what I've learned, because I grew up part of my life in a customary community in a village with my grandmother. What I realized there is that, every culture has what they identify as wrong and right. Say, for example, what is seen wrong, for example, in the Western culture could be seen as not a problem for some African society, African communities. Okay, in the customary family, a man marries more than one wife, 2, 3 wives, and those three wives, the family members are all part of the family, so they all work together as a cooperative in a sense. So whatever happens in our family is everybody's concerned, and everyone gets involved. And the authority to have things resolved in our family is not just with the husband and the wife. It goes to the elders of both families. So domestic violence occurring in a customary community is not just handled by the husband and the wife. It goes out to the community. And like what I learned when I was growing up is domestic violence in the sense of even like beating on a wife, on a woman, for example. I learned in my village from my grandmother and grandfather, if a man gets angry with his wife, he should never lift his hand to beat her, even when they are on the farm, working together on the farm. That's from Roman background, what I learned my grandparents in that village. If a man beats his wife on the farm, and that news gets out to the elders, it's not just a family issue. It's going to be the entire village going to hold that man in contempt. They're going to deal with him and punish him within the context and content of the custom and tradition of that village. I don't know much about what happened with the Western or Christian marriage. If a Christian husband beats his wife, except you guys, when they will tell me you are the expert of the Christian sector, I will talk more of my customary, because there where I grew up, there where I lived, a lot of my experience I have in life is based from my customary background. There's a time in my farm, in my home, there's a period of time. I mean, for my education, it should be all time, right? But a period of time in my home where no male, no man is allowed to even lift his voice high against a lady. I mean, there's a period of time where that period is seen like should I describe it as a holy period or whatever it is, that women are given that extraordinary protection in our town. If it was 6 months or whatever period of time, nothing happens. No one touches the women. No one even lifts his voice high against a woman. So if you can't lift your voice high against a woman in the public, you dare not try it even in privacy, where a woman gets angry, she takes it to the women center. Now, customarily, there's always a home, a place where women will take issues to the women center, and the women leader, the leader who is heading the women cultural activities there, takes it to the male leader, who now calls that man who was committed that crime for investigation, and if found guilty, he's punished. So if we can begin to discuss family value from the get-go, talking about what domestic violence is, what it means to protect your wife, what it means to protect your children, protect your husband also, I think the family should play a major role in curtailing domestic violence. For example, if parents are grown up, and in a home, the kids see the parents fighting all the time. The kids see the father beating on the wife, or sometimes the wife gets angry. She takes something and throw it at her husband in the house. The kids see that happening in the home. That becomes something that is dangerous, because those kids will learn that this is a way to move ahead. If the boy child in the home sees the father always being aggressive and talking loud, lifting his voice loud on his wife, on the mother, and beating on her, and there's no redress to that issue, that boy child grows up thinking that this is a way to show that you are the man or you are the boss in the home. So I would really think that families should begin to watch their activities, even in the midst of their children, and educational system should also play a role to educate the children, educate the population about domestic violence and the harm it has against society. But the domestic violence may harm family, but it also go beyond the family and harm the society, because the family is the nucleus of society. The family is the one that reproduces to increase population of society. So the family values are not upheld to the extent where domestic violence is prevented, then society is going to be having domestic violence as a way of life. And equally so, I go back to the religious institution, they should also play a role. If in every sermon you preach, you can take 15 minutes to talk about domestic violence, then your audience know that domestic violence is not, because the church is comprised of families. I mean, family of 2, one family of 3, family of 4, family of 5, even the mosques and other worship centers. I mean, people who go to those places are members of family institutions. So if the religious leader that everyone look up to for guardians can teach and instruct people that domestic violence is wrong, it's not a way to go, I think it will help society going forward. I hope I respond to your question as you expected, Patty.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you. We will continue this conversation.
Thank you.
In a few minutes. Okay, our next Reverend Kent, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Such a privilege to serve with the esteemed panelists. I am Pastor Lucinda Kent. I pastor Van Buren United Methodist Church in Northwest Washington, D.C. And while I am intending to bring the local church perspective I have very much appreciated all that has been offered so far, because my family is from the Cape Verde Islands, which is off the northwest coast of Africa. So I very much understand the cultural components of what feeds this. I remember, well, culturally, I come from parents and people who arrange marriages. My parents' marriage was an arranged marriage. And so with that, there's just a certain mindset about how relationships are transactional to a certain extent. And it definitely is something that involves family in its entirety and the community at large. I remember I was maybe a 4 or 5-year-old girl, and I saw my father slap my mother, what he thought was in the privacy of their bedroom. And what angered him was she was serving people. I grew up in a home where the women served the men, and we just stayed in the kitchen until it was time to either serve seconds or clear things out. And so even though we were here in the United States, culturally, our home was not, and our community was of like-minded individuals from the same places. And so this was acceptable behavior. And there was the impression that as long as the woman did what was expected of her, then she could avoid this response. Unfortunately, that's the lie of it all, because this is not about inappropriate behavior. And it is a problem, not only on the woman's part who feels that this is okay to live and sustain as lifestyle and home life, but also to have the spouse, the husband, to be able to express and engage in this way and have it handled as acceptable behavior. So there are two sides of problems here. As a pastor of a local church, I try to care for areas of domestic violence on a one-on-one basis. While there are lots of levels and layers of why it is a problem, not only in the States, but as we can see, it is worldwide. As I stand at the sacred desk, you know, our statistics say 1 in 3 women have been victims of some violence by an intimate partner within their lifetime. So as I count off the people who were sitting in front of me on a Sunday, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1 in 4 women have been victims of severe physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. So as I have people in front of me every Sunday and other days of the week, I just count off. And I know whether it is communicated or not, that it must be in my worshiping community. Statistics say 1 in 7 women have been stalked by an intimate partner during their lifetime, to the point in which they felt very fearful or believed that someone close to them would cause them harm. And so on a very local level, I just need to count people off and understand that whether they have made it known or not, it is in my worshiping community. And so as a pastor, what do I do and what do I say and how do I care for this? I speak about it because I think while it's kept a dirty little secret, it's allowed to thrive and grow. If it is spoken in a manner that is associated with behavior, and that if you adjust your behavior, that you can adjust this violent response. And that is also untrue. I think that because we are still in a predominantly patriarchal society, women don't have equity. They don't have financial equity. They don't have employment equity. And generally, if they are considering leaving the home, they have to consider leaving the home with their children. So then what? And even some of the local resources that we try to provide and are able to provide, we may be able to provide a room in a hotel for a few days, but then what? And we also, as a local pastor, I have to be prepared that I might be in communication with someone who is willing to share with me, but not quite ready to leave. So I have to journey with them, and I have to be prayerful with them, and I have to encourage and support them, because the individual is not ready until they are ready. And that's a very complicated journey to walk with someone. However, as has already been offered, as a spiritual leader, it is a responsibility that I have, while I continue to say, you are worth more. This is inappropriate. This is not God's best for you. However, I'm not judging you, and I'm loving you, and God loves you. And so let me hold your hand until you're ready. And then when you're ready, we can talk about next steps, next plans, next decisions. But it's not as simple as saying, why do you stay? Why don't you leave? How could you let yourself be in a situation? And these are educated people. This is not a matter of ignorance. And in certain cases, it's not even financial. And unfortunately, there are individuals who believe they deserve this and that they don't deserve anything better. And so when we talk about domestic violence, it is layered, it is complex, it is involved. And as spiritual leaders, we do offer the hands and feet of Jesus. We offer the words of the Bible, and we want to encourage what it says and what it doesn't say. We have to be able to say, I know you took those vows, but God has an exit plan. This is not God's best for you. And love is such a complicated thing that you can love your abuser. You can love your abuser, even though you don't love what they do to you. And so for someone who deals with this on a much more individual basis, there's a lot of trust and confidence, because there's a lot of shame that is tied to this and a lot of embarrassment. And so while I may know things privately, I may have to be with you publicly and watch you sit right next to the person that I know is causing you harm. And so I appreciate that there continues to be a forum provided. Thank you, Reverend Brownell, so that we can continue to discuss this, because that is part of the solution. And there are people who don't even realize that they are not in an abusive situation. They think this is what it is. And I think for me, the most startling thing about this is it used to be, or at least our understanding or my understanding, is that it was something between married people. Maybe it was tied to an old world culture, which is not true, because here in the States, it is alive and well, just based on the statistics. But young people, high schoolers, are in boyfriend-girlfriend relationships where violence is how they are engaging with one another, where we are not talking about married people and there are children and families involved. And, you know, there's just so much when they think about leaving, because they cannot just leave alone. But I'm in conversation with single women who are in relationships that do not bind them to marriage. And I'm in conversations where I have to explain what love is and what love is not. Something as simple as what love is. And 1 Corinthians 13, it gives you your checklist. And so I sit there and say, if it is not these things, it is not for you. And it is startling, the young women who believe that this is normal, and they are not married people. And so it's been an interesting facet of how I serve. And certainly these 2.5 years of COVID have escalated the conversations and the level of abuses that are being experienced, because people were closed in and had no choice. And the stress of being closed in day after day, jobs were lost, finances brought different struggles to the household, and the children were in the house as well. And so it was a powder cake of its own in so very many ways. And so it is very overwhelming. And as a woman, I really want to say, just leave. Just leave. But it really is not that simple and that easy. And I also appreciate how what we've heard so far is this is not something that just lives within the couple. It lives within the family. It is taught to the children because they learn by watching. It is cultural. It is society. It is legislation that doesn't provide equity for women to be able to have better choices so that they can leave should they have decided that that is what they want to do in the confines of that relationship. And the finances don't support the woman and her children. And so it is multifaceted, it is complex. Unfortunately, there is still clergy that will encourage people to stay and hold that relationship. And so I think it's important for the clergy who don't hold that and are not fearful of what their denomination may say, and this belongs to no particular denomination either. It shows no favoritism. It crosses all ages, all colors, all ethnicities, all religious lanes. And so, and it is a worldwide issue. It is a worldwide issue. So I appreciate that we have people representing different sides of our globe so that we can understand. While COVID was a pandemic, this equally is a pandemic. And unfortunately, a lot of our laws do not take measures unless you have been critically, physically hurt, or you have been put in the cemetery. And so I just invite everyone, if you see something, say something. Even if that person is not ready, at least they know someone sees them, and you let them know, I'm here to listen until you're ready to do more. And if you're not ready to do more, I will just hold your hand in the process.
Pastor Cindy, that was powerful. That was powerful. I mean, this is multifaceted and it is complex. And we really do need to be creative and intentional when we come up with strategies to address these issues. So thank you for sharing that. I jotted down some of the nuggets that you gave. You know, trying to deal with it on a one-on-one basis, you know, very important. And the reality of the situation that people who are going through this, not all of them are ready to leave the situation. And I mean, what do you do? Do you respect their wishes, or do you report their husband? You know, as clergy, what do you do, you know, in those situations? You know?
Well, I think the first thing that I do is find out what permissions do I have for sharing. And once I receive the permissions of sharing or not sharing, that informs next steps and next conversations. I think that you have to have both parties in the conversation, because it really isn't one individual that's the problem. You do have the aggressor, but I think that there is just something about being willing to be in a situation like that and stay in a situation like that. There's gaps that need to be filled. You know, you need to understand who you are and whose you are. regardless of who you see as your creator, because this is not, while this is a faith-based conversation, it doesn't belong to the United Methodist Church that I serve, not at all. And so you have to understand that you are a valuable creature and that you are loved and beloved. And if you don't begin to fill those gaps, it is very difficult to be able to start considering why this is not a good situation, what's inappropriate about these behaviors. It is not your fault because there's nothing you can do to bring out violence in someone who acts out in that way. And so, you know, it's like a fingerprint. It varies from individual to individual. But I think the important thing is to have a willingness to create space, to a safe space to speak about it, and to let the individual let you know where they are in that space and be able to meet them there.
Thank you for that. There are some questions in the comment section. I just want to let our viewers know that there will be a Q&A segment where we will address your questions and your comments. So far, we have two questions, and one has to do with Reverend Odell asked the question. So what if the case is the pastor if the pastor is the abuser, you know, what do you do? But we'll just park that right now. We'll address it later. And then hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right. Bonnie Coley said the way the resource center at the church level was explained doesn't provide an answer to in case the abuser is a ranking church official. So once again, it goes back to the ranking church officials. You know, how do we deal with issues of domestic violence when the abuser is actually the religious leader? So we'll address those questions later. Thank you for your questions. So next we'll have Jackie Wilson. Jackie, the floor is yours. Jackie, can you hear me?
My apology. Yes, I can. My phone was dying. So I'm sorry. I was getting some text messages about how can they get logged on. So sorry about that. My phone was dying.
Okay, so are they able to log on to Facebook Live?
I haven't. I've sent the information, the link, or the information to your page. So I'm just waiting to see if someone is going to say something different.
Because if you friend me on then I can share it on your page, and you know you'll have it if that
That's
works.
fine. I can do that. Okay.
Okay, so it's yours, all yours.
Okay, well, I have heard quite a bit today, and everything everyone said, I can relate to it, agree with everything that has been shared. So I'm just gonna kind of touch on a little bit of my agreements to what has already been mentioned. Now, I actually, as you mentioned before, I have a organization that I started. I'm a one-woman organization pretty much. I do speaking engagements. I've written my books. I come from a place of also being a survivor of domestic violence in my marriage, and mine wasn't physical. And so therefore, I didn't think it was a form of abuse until after the divorce. And I started going to college and for social work. And that's when I realized, wow, what I had actually gone through was different forms of abuse. And so, of course, I'm shocked at that time because I'm like, I know I was going through a lot in the marriage and being unhappy and, dealing with anxiety and depression. And I did talk to, because I was raised in the church, raised Catholic, transitioned over at about in my mid-20s to non-denominational. So being raised in the church and seeing so many different things, I could look at some people's marriage and see that there was some control going. So I knew that was what abuse was, right? I knew about the physical part. I knew about the verbal and the sexual side when you talk about abuse. I saw my brother abusing his girlfriends growing up. And so I visually saw that. But that's not what was in my home. That's not what I experienced. So because it wasn't the education that I knew, I was ignorant when it comes to the other forms of abuse. And so for me, when I'm speaking, what I try to share from is a perspective of don't look for outer bruises. Okay, don't get stuck on that. Don't look at the physical part. I need to see a black eye. I need to see some bruising on somebody. Don't just focus on that, because abuse is more than just the physical side. It's more than the sexual and the verbal side. So I wasn't verbally abused either, but I was manipulated. I dealt with emotional abuse. I dealt with psychological abuse. I dealt with the gaslighting, the financial abuse. I was an at-home mom for 13 years of that time that we were together for 16 years. So I dealt with a lot of other forms, and I knew I was unhappy. I knew, I went through a lot of dealing with anxiety and depression. At one point I was going to see a therapist, but we were so high up in the ministry. I was actually the armor bearer for the bishop and the first lady. And my husband at the time, he was the personal bodyguard. So you don't quite go right to the pastors and start talking about what you're going through, right? Because you're trying to keep that covering of your spouse. And you don't want a whole lot of people to know what you're dealing with. So you keep that to yourself as well. And I did the exact same thing when I went for therapy. So I didn't share a whole lot. So guess what? I was misdiagnosed, right? So she looked at more so me being depressed. I just had a baby. I dealt with postpartum depression. So it was a whole lot of other things that was overlooked. But it was more so me because I didn't open up to talk about it. I didn't feel that safe place to talk and share. And through the years, as time goes on, it's like you deal with a lot of different things. And in the church, our church back then, they didn't talk about abuse, and I suspected there was several people, even as we go up to the high up leaders, that they were dealing with abuse, either their wives were dealing with it, right? But it wasn't discussed. It wasn't discussed within the church. We were on the marriage ministry. It wasn't discussed in the marriage ministry, right? So we talking back in the 90s. I've been divorced now 13 years, so it's been a long time ago, but none of that was discussed. And he was actually a police officer, former Marine, the person that I was married to. So there's a lot of things that were going on, right? And when you talk about the complexity of domestic violence, you're definitely true. It is. It has so many different layers. And when I look at, as a life coach, when I'm talking to individuals, and even on my speaking engagements, when I'm done and I go to the schools, I go to the colleges and talk, and I hear a lot of conversations that come back, and they're asking questions for me where I think you should just know this. But then I have to think about it and say, I can't say that because that means I'm judging that person to think and feel like I was or how I was raised, right? So then I have to, look at things. I've learned through the years to look at it from a different perspective because everybody's household wasn't the same. Everybody's normal of a relationship was not the same. So some individuals think that because they saw their grandparents go through abuse, their mom or how their parents talk to each other or the physical side, if they saw that, that's the norm for them. So even as a teen, as a young preteen, as a teenager, because I go into the schools and talk to the middle school and high schoolers about it. And trust me, they know a lot about domestic violence. They really do. They're able to tell me, can name all of the different forms of abuse. So they know about it, but it's a norm for them because this is what their environment showed them. This is what their environment taught them, right? And I read some years ago that from a medical doctor, and he said that by the time a child is 16 years old, whatever that environment has been, that has taught that child that's what life is going to be like. That's what my relationships are going to be like. So they've already formed that by the time they turn 18. We can't tell them anything as a teenager, right? Because they already think they know. So whatever they've experienced, this is what they've brought into their adult life. And they're just going to continue on in that way. There are times where they can get better guidance to help them, through that, and they can see and make a change. Because we've even heard what athletes talk about it. We've heard entertainers talking about it. We've heard pastors and, other leaders to talk about what they've gone through and how they've made those changes. So it is a possibility for change, but it starts from that individual wanting that change, right? So we can't want it enough for that abuser to make a change. They have to want that change. And so when I share with the women and men, because I work with men and women that have been in abusive relationships, even more than once, and what I share with them is, even though you're in this relationship, majority of the time, it goes back to what I said before, it's what their environment taught them. So they're in these relationships, not so much because they love everything that's going on about it, but this is what their normal has been. And so they think this is just how relationships are. I saw my parents go through it. I saw my mom go through it. So this must just be what relationships are. And so to try to help them to see it from a different perspective, it's like foreign to them, right? Because they're so used to this. So as we're going through to try to explain, you know, what to look for, what I found, I focus a lot on the healing side of that, helping them to understand how to love themselves. Because if we don't love ourselves, we're going to find ourselves in so many different situations that are unhealthy because of that, whether it's drugs, whether it's alcohol, you know, whether it's, you know, living a life that you're ashamed of, you know, for that individual, because they're coping with the hurt, right? They're coping with that pain in any way that they can find on how it's going to help them to deal with that, whether they've been sexually assaulted or dealt with domestic violence. They're looking for ways to cope with that. And majority of the time, it's going to be some kind of drug. You know, it's going to be them continuing to live that promiscuous life because that's what they've been used to doing, right? And they don't have that self-esteem. So, you know, I also kind of go back to when I was younger and there were boys in school that used to like me, or I saw they liked the other girls at school. And instead of saying, hi, I like you, can I be your friend? They would go with tripping the little girl, pushing her outside, pulling on her hair. And, you know, and then when I would come home and tell my mom, oh, you know, so-and-so pulled my hair, or when I was walking, he tripped me. Oh, he probably just likes you, you know, and that's just what they're doing. The teachers would say that, oh, they just like you. Okay. So what is that doing? When we look back now and we know that domestic violence, that is like a form of it, right? But it's on a smaller scale. But guess what? They're taught that that's okay. They go home and say, oh, I like so-and-so and I pushed her today, or, you know, or whatever. And they think it's okay because it's condoned. Oh, he just likes you. You know, the girls will do that too. Oh, she just likes you. So they're desensitized, right, to this form of treatment as a child. And as they get older, I've been doing this, and guess what? I got a reaction. I pushed her and I got a reaction. She likes me. Now we're boyfriend and girlfriend. Okay. So they're just going to continue on. And not only that, think about how often we've told our little boys if they fall, oh, don't cry. Little boys don't cry, right? You're not supposed to show your emotions. So as a child, we're teaching the little boys not to show their emotions. Okay. Only girls cry. So when we say things like this, we're causing the little boys at a young age to not appreciate their emotions. And when they don't appreciate their emotions, then what does that do? It causes them, because they're not appreciating their emotions, then what do you think they're doing? They're going to be less likely, right, to appreciate the little girl's emotions. If I can't appreciate mine, why would I appreciate yours? And so that's also setting up for them to look at it and say, well, I was taught not to appreciate my emotions, and I'm just going to continue on. So when they see their sister crying, when they see a girlfriend crying, oh, just suck it up. You know, it's not that difficult. It's not that bad. So all of what we did back years ago has, I think, and I'm not saying this is all the fault. I'm just saying it has contributed to that, to the environment that was already an unhealthy environment. And it continued on through the years. And now we're looking at the result of it. I even had to catch myself, because when my kids were growing up and I was raising my bonus child, say that he was a stepson, but I always called him my bonus child. And even raising him, I would tell him, oh, little boys don't cry, don't cry. And I thought about it years later when I'm in college, and I'm like, wow, I really made him feel like he couldn't express his emotions by telling him that. But this is what I was conditioned to say, because I heard my mom say that. I heard my sisters tell their brothers that. So it's something that we learn, whether when you, some of you all mentioned about a system. When we get caught up in that system, the generations that's going on, generational curses or generational cycles that's going on, when we get caught up in that, it just continues on. And until we go back and try to break it within our own family, we can't go back years ago, but we can try to break it within our own families on how can we move forward and not continue to say the same things that are unhealthy, right? Because we continue to repeat that, and we're continuing it on right now in 2022, right? We're still saying the same things. Don't cry, don't show your emotions. But why? Why not? And we make the little boys grow up into men to think, I can't show my emotions. So it's okay for them to strike out and hit somebody because I don't care about your emotions because I don't care about mine, right? And it's not really a way of building healthy relationships within their own community. And then, you know, the men have and not to say that women don't abuse, because they do, but the majority of it comes from men because they look at us as the weaker vessel, you know, within that relationship and taking that control, right? And they don't respect us as women. And so I think it's a totality of everything that's going on. I don't believe that individuals stay in the relationships because they like it. I think that's a myth. I don't believe they stay in because, you know, I'm just happy being in this relationship. I think women and men stay in these relationships majority of the time because of the kids. Because if I leave my kids with this woman or with this man, or if I decide to leave from that relationship, I'm taking a chance on maybe losing my kids because I've left this abusive relationship, right? Or I'm leaving my kids in the company. If it's the woman that's the abuser, then I'm leaving my children in the company of the abuser. So I saw what we went through, and I'm looking for that to happen to my kids if I leave from that situation, right? And then we also can talk about the money as an issue as well. You know, not wanting to go on the shelter, maybe not wanting to become homeless. So there's a lot of different reasons why individuals stay. The ones that I have talked to over the course of over 10 years, those have been the majority of the reasons why they don't leave, why they stay in these relationships, right? And then when they go to the church to talk, because I did too, and guess what I was told? And I didn't tell everything, right? Because I was smart enough not to tell everything because I'm still covering him, right? So the things that I did say, guess what? I was told by the mothers in the church, well, let me give you some scriptures to read on, to meditate on, right? You pray about it. God's going to work it out. And I would go and read the scriptures. I'd come to church, you know, come to morning prayer. And I would go to morning prayer and I was doing everything. I was on the phone, right? All of this. And then when I would go back and say, well, things aren't changing. Well, you're not praying hard enough. And I'm thinking, well, how much harder can I pray, right? Okay. So, you know, it just didn't make sense. And so I know it's because the churches and, you know, the leaders aren't educated about domestic violence. And I just want to say, Pastor Kent, I applaud you on the efforts that you've done and what you've shared with us today on how you've helped your members at your church. There needs to be a lot more pastors like you that are doing this, you know, and even opening up a forum to talk about it in the church, you know, have in their women's ministry, in their teen ministry to talk about it. But what I did find in a couple other churches that I've gone to back in Wisconsin, that's where I'm originally from, some of the pastors or the leaders were the abuser. So of course, they're not going to want to talk about it, right? Okay, because they think their household is okay. So I'm not going to address this. And as we were talking or listening to you all today, one of the thoughts that I was thinking of when we talk about why this is happening and why individuals are staying, and these conferences that you know, churches have for the women, for the men, but are they really touching the heart of that individual? Are they really touching the part of that person's life where they are broken, where they are hurting at? You have to get to that part of that person before you can get to any other part about you need to do this, your marriage needs this, your marriage needs that, or you being a single mom. If that woman is broken or that man is broken, you got to start with them going through some healing before they can get to the next level of their marriage being better, you know, or them striving, you know, or even believing that God is in their life, that God is there with them, even though they're going through. A lot of times of the individuals that I've spoken to, you know, they're blaming God because of what happened to them. And it's like when I try to tell them, you can't, all of my years, not one time did I blame God, because I look at it like this. You chose that person. You chose that mate. So you can't blame God, you know, for that. You have to take your responsibility to say, I chose this person, good or bad. And I got to work on how can I get out of this situation. But we can't blame God for that situation because it's not God's fault that we got in that situation. We have to look a little bit deeper than that. And I know for me, I was a hurting teenager. And guess what I did? When I became an adult, I was dealing with unresolved issues from my teenager into an adulthood. And that's how I got into these broken relationships, because I was broken. So until I can become healed and work on me, I can't blame anybody else. And if I'm still hurt and I'm still unhealed, I'm going to continue to attract those kind of people in that situation, whether it's a friend, whether it's a family member, whether it's an intimate relationship. I'm still attracting hurt people in my life, and that cycle is going to continue on. So that's why for me, I focus a lot on helping the individuals to realize, how did I get here? How did you get here? What happened in your life that caused you to get to this point? What did you deal with? What are you still dealing with? You know, you're dealing with, you haven't been healed. You're still dealing with your past. You got to work on that first. Go to therapy, you know, go and talk to your pastor or a leader at the church. I'm real big on therapy. And even though my parents weren't big on therapy, I'm huge on that. And I can see, I'm a very big proponent on it because I can see how it can help. I've gone through that, you know, so I know that there's a way to get healing through that. But if we can't focus on how can we heal, we've gone through the issues, but now we got to look at how can I heal past that? Because if we stay stuck on, I'm a survivor, but what are you doing to try to change that mindset? Because it's a mindset thing. You know, as you get out of that, you got to work on healing. Some kind of healing needs to take place as you're moving forward. And I think if the church kind of open up that door to be able to talk about it, because we look to the church to do a lot of things. And from what I was told, the church is there for hurt people, right? For sick people. But it's only for sick people to a point. If you're in an abusive relationship, we're not here for you for that, right? Because we don't want to address that because it's a sensitive subject. But we still got people that's hurting, right? And we still want them to give. We want them to be active in the ministry, right? We want them to do things within the ministry, but we're not touching the heart of that person, of what they're really struggling with, that can make a huge difference in the lives of all of our people. So that's all I got for you all.
That was good, Jackie. That was good. Oh my goodness. So many nuggets here. So many nuggets. Wow. Touching the heart of the individual. When you mentioned the church conferences and how it doesn't touch the heart of the individual, are you talking about what, like the marital conferences? What type of conferences?
Usually the conferences are more like the, you know, where they have these traveling all over and they want you to come in to get the word, to hear pastors or leaders that are talking. But yet when you get there, it's more or less about the church, you know, about how you can get, I want to kind of, I want to be a little careful of what I'm going to say, but I want to put it out there anyway. So, when I was back in the church, I'll just say in Wisconsin, they used to have these revivals. They would have the conferences every year. And when you would come, it was still pretty much the same sermon that you would get on a Sunday, talking about God and how good he is in your life. And, you know, but not really touching the heart of that person. You know, I'm broken in this area. I know God can help me in my finances. I know God can help me in a lot of these other areas. But have I really invited God in to help me in this area where I'm broken because of these relationships, right, that I've been in? So I think that's kind of like where I'm coming from. Instead of it being more so, let's talk about your finances, talk about, you know, marriage life and what marriage should be, you know, how you should be living in your life, but not really touching like where if there's abuse, you need to leave. I mean, like really getting deep down into, you know, just putting it out there, just coming raw and saying, hey, if you're in an abusive relationship, you need to get out of that. If this is what abuse looks like in your family, you need to leave. We need the other parts. I'm not saying that's in the wrong way. Trust me, I'm not, because as a minister, I definitely can't talk like that. Okay, so I'm not saying it is wrong to talk about the other topics, but that's the topic that's missed. Forgiveness is a topic that's missed. I can tell you at the churches that I've gone through, because now I'm in Texas, so I've moved from Wisconsin to Arizona to Texas, and the ministries that I've set up under, I can count it on one hand how many times forgiveness have been taught in the church. That shouldn't be. That should not be. Because we need to even focus on ourselves to forgive ourselves. And that's not taught in the church. It's about forgiving other people when it is mentioned, right? But not about forgiving yourself, forgiving yourself for being in that situation. And just really being able to understand when you are taught on forgiveness, who gets the power out of that? The power is the person that forgives, right? But it just still seems like it's surface. It's like just scratching the surface just a little, not really getting into the trenches of that. And so that's what I'm talking about. I would love to have, when I was in Arizona, I was doing monthly events for women. We talk about health and wellness. We talk about healing. I'd have a guest speaker to come in, and we would really get into where the women felt comfortable. They felt safe with opening up and talking about what they were dealing with, their own personal struggles. And I think that's something that needs to happen. So I'm just going to put it out here for anyone that's on here listening. If you don't feel comfortable being around a whole lot of people, what's wrong with maybe just the friends that you have, setting up a monthly conversation time, chat time, and just talk about what you're actually going through. That should be create a safe place for you all to talk, because majority of the times we're not talking. And let me just kind of put out some stats out here that I think are very alarming. So 54% of women of color are survivors of intimate partner violence. That's alarming, 54%. Now, when we talk about the children, why it's so prevalent from preteen to teenagers with teen dating violence, because 1 in 15 children are exposed to intimate partner violence each year. And 90% of these children are eyewitnesses of their parents or somebody in their family, in their environment, dealing with domestic violence. And so they think at a young age, this is just how it's supposed to be. This is my environment, right? So they're going to continue on. And this is what's happening within the preteen and the teenagers, why it's so common now about domestic violence. And actually teen dating violence is celebrated in February for you all that out there that's watching. So please be mindful of that as well, teen dating violence. And the last one I want to leave you all with, out of all of the stats that I just told you, and ones that have been mentioned today, only 34% of people who are injured with domestic violence go and get medical help. And majority of the time is because they don't want so-and-so to go to jail, because so-and-so might already have a case and they don't want him to go back to jail or her to go back to jail. So they're not reporting it. They want their family to stay together. Maybe that person is the breadwinner, so they don't want to say anything. So there's reasons behind that, which is why I think this forum right here is so very, very important to talk about it and to expose it, because we can't stop talking about it. Even if we do not mention it as much within our own community or our own family, doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means we're just not talking about it. And so I try to do my part by sharing and, being that person. I do videos on Facebook and, YouTube. I mean, I'm out there, sharing to try to get the message out there, even with my books, to get the message out there, because it's so important. And when I look at the stats to say 54% of women of color, but let me just tell you this, over 46% are African-American women that don't report, that are being abused. So it's definitely happening within our community.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for that. Okay, so now we are going to put everybody in the room together, and we're going to have a nice little conversation. We'll start off with some of the questions or the comments mentioned in the chat. The biggest one, what happens is the pastor is the abuser. How do we address those issues when your religious head or your religious leader is the one who is the abuser?
Every pastor has someone that they serve under. Every denomination has its own flow chart of things, but I think that you take it to whoever is the person that pastor answers to, because there is an expectation of our behavior. There is an expectation of our behavior. And we should not be afraid to go to whoever it is, whether it is the bishop or a district superintendent or whatever that next layer of leadership is. Something might not come out of it, but I think you still have to make a point to say that you see this and have it become a matter of record. And it's entirely possible that 10 other people have already gone. You might think you're the only person, you might think you're the first person, and even if you are, but as I said when I had the opportunity to offer some of my thoughts earlier in our time together, see something, say something. See something, say something. And I think that that's a posture that we should take, irrespective of whether this person is your pastor or your congressperson. I think that we do have a personal responsibility that if we see something, we say something. And I think if we say it in a documented way, we start building a trail that may be helpful at a later time, because this thing, it's always a journey. It's always a journey. And so I think that that's how you begin to go about it. It only continues to live if it stays a secret and it stays quiet and it stays behind closed doors. So the more light we put on it, the more air that we give it, the more breath that we give it, the more difficult it becomes for that individual to maintain a leadership position and continue in those behaviors behind their own closed doors.
Thank you for that. I'm going to play the devil's advocate because I'm aware of some situations where a person did report it to the individual that the pastor reported to. And the person continued to serve in that leadership role. That person was never sat down, continued with their ministry, serving in that church. I think the most his pastor or the head pastor did was, maybe arrange for marital counseling and so forth. And, he scolded that person once, but the person continued to serve in the church. And it got to a point where everybody just knew this person to have this sort of personality. But the person was still Reverend so-and-so and still continued to serve in that church. So what happens then? What happens then?
As a worshiper, we have personal responsibility on who we are in front of. And in front of my own sacred desk, I tell my worshiping community, you better be sure about who you allow to speak into your spirit. And so we have some personal responsibility about who we let speak into our spirit. And if that is your spiritual leader and they continue to serve in that role, you may have to find a place that is better suited for your spiritual life and your spiritual development. We can't always expect that something will be done. I think that we do have personal responsibility to say something, whether it offers a change or not. But if it doesn't, we are complicit. If we continue to show up, we continue to serve, we continue to partner, we continue to undergird and support someone who is not living up to the expectations that we should have of our spiritual leadership. There should be some level of accountability. But where my freedom is I don't have to come and keep your seat warm on a Sunday. I don't have to tune into your live stream. I don't have to support your house of worship financially. And I think that the best that we can do is be in a place of personal responsibility about it. Because at the end of the day, we will all answer for the choices we made and the choices we didn't make. And so.
Thank you for that. Anyone else has a perspective?
Can I just make a little comment on that? I think a lot of that has to do with the title of that person, the friendships they have with the leaders, the relationship they have. They don't want to lose that. Even though it's like what Pastor Kent just said, even though there's an expectation, that's still my friend. Now, I'm a minister. My husband at the time, or ex-husband, he's a minister in the church. And he stepped out and had an affair and was still active in the ministry. Never stepped down, but there was another minister before him that had stepped out on his wife. And when my ex-husband came in to become over that ministry, he was told to sit him down. This was before he did anything wrong in my marriage. He was told to sit this other person down, and he did. But when his time came, no one sat him down. He continued on to do what he was doing, and she was in the choir. Nothing was ever done. And remember, I told you he was the personal bodyguard, or still is, personal bodyguard to the bishop and first lady. So I believe it's the title and it's that relationship. And I was the weakest link. So that person that just asked that question, she's the weakest, he or she is the weakest link in that situation, which is unfair, but that's usually what happens.
Thank you. Reverend Birch, did you want to say something?
Yes, I think in my church, for instance, we have a policy in our church discipline that you report such a thing, then investigations are carried out, and then you have disciplinary action that are taken. But I think the clergy has a lot behind the ministerial title and behind spirituality, and then do what they want to do. Take away the spirituality. At the end of the day, it's your character that is important. And I think we do not talk about this, and we are not bold enough to talk about them. I have had cases when both the husband and the wife are ministers, and it was abusive. She was bold enough to report it to the hierarchy, not in my church. And she was told, do you want to destroy the church? We cannot allow you to do this. So the man is higher than the lady in the church, still serving. Is the lady still there? I held her hand, and as she said, Reverend Brent, Kent, and we started the work together. Along the way, she just dropped out. It's not all of them that we are able to hold hands with for years. So I had to let go. Are they still there? Yes, they are there. Is the man still serving? Yes, he is serving. But for me personally, I think I have a passion of speaking out very loud about things like this. If I do, no, I always speak out loud against it. Do I have the power to stop it or to bring that person down? I do have relationship to call the hierarchy to do something about it. So I exploit that relationship and I push it until I see something is being done about it. But definitely, we need to talk about it and we need to condemn it. I think that is what I can say to that.
Thank you. Johnny?
So, I mean, with regards to the question, let me first, appreciate the comments and statements came from our three sisters. I mean, they spoke very well. Jackalyn, Lucinda, and Bijoue. I think they've done well in the presentation. I am not a professional religious leader in the sense that I'm not going to any religious school. So with the issue of domestic violence, I would like to just ask the four of you, for the matter of fact, Reverend and Ranel, how do we train our church leaders? How do we train our religious leaders in terms of preparing the sermon to respond to some of these social? Domestic violence is a social problem that ranges from the church, the family, and society as a whole. So if, for example, the religious institution, as I said, as one of the key social institutions for society, is playing the role to guide the spiritual thoughts, spiritual healing, spiritual and consciousness of people in society, how are they trained to respond to domestic violence? If it is not part of the School of Theology, for example, I would think that religious education institutions should begin to look at domestic violence as a societal issue that should be confronted directly through the training of church leaders and other religious leaders, so that they can begin to consider it as a part of their sermon. In as much as domestic violence has become a global issue in all society among all races, every region, every part of the world experience domestic violence. So what are we doing from the religious perspective in terms of training church leaders to include domestic violence or prevention in their sermon on the regular worship service, as opposed to having a lot of miracle services?
Jenny, I'm glad you asked that question. In fact, that was one of the reasons why I created the Women's Advocacy and Resource Center, because these forums allow people to be educated on these issues and also to engage faith leaders, because my focus is on engaging faith leaders and basically putting faith leaders' feet to the fire. You know, it is your moral imperative, right? You are serving, the congregants in your church are not just male. In fact, most of the congregants in the churches are women. And it's your responsibility, you know, to serve these women who are going through these horrible situations, you know? And the fact of the matter is there is a level of inaction. Too many of the churches are just too quiet on these issues. Most of the churches just want to sweep it under the rug as though it does not exist. So apart from doing these ecumenical forums, and Johnny, you know that I also do what's called focus on faith and gender, because the last time we had conversation with men, right, on issues of sexual violence against women, where I brought you and some other men together. But apart from that, also being able to train religious leaders, you know, on issues of domestic violence. How do you counsel your members who are not just the ones being victimized, but also the perpetrators? How do we create safe space for people going through these situations? And you're right, there aren't too many curriculums in seminaries that exist. Okay, since I started working on this five years ago, you know, I've been researching different seminaries. In fact, I'm getting ready to do my doctoral program. And I've been accepted to Southern Methodist University. And I've been paying keen attention, do they have certificate programs that deal with issues of domestic violence or, you know, women empowerment issues and so forth? So far, I've seen a certificate program at SMU and another one at Duke University. Wesley Theological Seminary, where I graduated from, even though they taught ethics, I've never, you know, seen anything in terms that it's addressing violence against women. And I mean, it's just easy to address other topics than addressing violence against women. So yeah. I believe that this is my calling that God has given me, that being a reverend is to be able to challenge people, whether they like it or not, especially spiritual leaders. Things have to change. First of all, we have to deal with the issue of the interpretation of scriptures, you know, that's used to justify the mistreatment of women and relegate women to certain roles. Those things have to be addressed. During the time when I was doing my research, most of the things that came out of the mouths of people who call themselves Christians was the fact that, okay, well, the woman, you know, it's justifiable that the woman is beaten or mistreated, well, because, you know, Adam was created first, right? We hear this all over Africa all the time. Adam was created first. The man is the head of the home. The woman is to submit. And what gets me is they don't read, there's no context when they're reading the scriptures. It's not contextual. There have been times where I've actually had literal arguments with people, you know, because some of them had no idea that I was a theologically trained minister. So when they start talking like that, say, excuse me, I'm going to have to interrupt you, because what you're saying does not make any sense and is not biblical. It's not biblical. even if God says you are the head of the house, does it mean that you abuse your wife, that you kill your wife? Is that justifiable?
Yeah.
You know,
Reverend, Reverend, 1 minute. I mean, just about a few months ago, I was listening to a program on BBC. And this young man, this from the Catholic Church, right? And this young man was abused by the priest. And what shocked me was, and he said the priest told him that if he exposes it to the public, God will not bless him. I mean, it was a program, BBC, I normally listen to international radio station, right? And this guy was saying that, I mean, this priest abused this young man at the early age of 15. And as they continuously continue to abuse the young man, his warning to the young man was that if you bring it out to the public, God will not bless you. Jesus Christ will not bless you. I mean, it was an interview that was carried on BBC some few months ago. They were talking about this same faith and religion and all the kind of things, they were having a BBC program. And coming back to us in Africa or in other parts of the world, because the thing is that the congregation does not have a mind to be critical of their pastor or their preaching man. So, and like I tell people all the time, I don't mind, you can be the Pope, I must be critical of what you tell me. But for a matter of fact, by being a pastor or a reverend, you are not God. You are playing a role to interpret the scripture to me. So if you're interpreting the scripture to me, I don't understand, I must critique you. So if critiquing you means that I don't believe in God, then that's it. God knows that I have the right to ask questions to increase my knowledge about what you are telling me. But a lot of congregations do not see that as an opportunity. They go to church, whatever the pastor says, they say it's the word of God. Therefore, let's take it as it is. So even if the church leader happens to commit an offense against the church, not necessarily domestic violence, but any other offense against the church, they dare to talk about it because they believe that this man is a man of God, and it is only him that God knows among the 1,000 congregation. And I disagree with that. So domestic violence, as we are saying, our discussion here is around domestic violence. Church faith leaders, not just church, Muslim leaders. I mean, I hope this discussion, you will try to get some Muslim leaders to come on the show to discuss. From the Muslim faith, how are they looking at domestic violence in the Muslim faith? How is Baha'u'llah? How is the Ikaka? How is and Hinduism? How are they all looking at domestic violence? That's from the issue. Because domestic violence is occurring in the family, and the family is the first institution society. It is from the family that we build the religious institution, we build the economic institution, we build the education, and we build the politics. That's in sociology. So if these religious institutions are not brought on the platform to tell us how are they looking at domestic violence, then I think we should move forward in this. But I would think that if the church leaders and all of faith-based leaders are serious about addressing domestic violence, they should try to set an example and make it part of their sermon on every preaching day.
I completely agree with everything that you say. Now, in terms of we do have an interfaith component. I've been wanting to do an interfaith dialogue on issues of gender-based violence. And I'll be calling you because you and I had a conversation about the Interfaith Council, right? Okay. So you and I, Johnny, we're going to be working on that, the interfaith aspects of it. One thing that you touched on was spiritual abuse, because everything that you just described is spiritual abuse. There are a lot of congregants who are going through spiritual abuse in their churches. Whatever the pastor says, I do. I don't, read the word of God for myself to determine whether it's biblical or not. And it's sad because, it's not even just in African countries, because it's here too. A lot of times we worship the pastors, whatever they say. Can you imagine in some countries, you have a pastor telling you to strip naked and you're stripping naked. You have another one punching you in the stomach and talking about he's healing you. And the people go along with it. Now, can you blame the spiritual leader completely for that? The congregants has to take some sort of responsibility. Because
From
I mean,
my
let's just
sacred
look at
desk.
sheer common sense, right?
From my sacred desk,
Yeah.
I say often and regularly, don't trust what I say the word says. Confirm that what I say is what the word says. You have to know that word for yourself, because you should never trust me that much. And I should not be uncomfortable if you bring questions to me about
Exactly.
whatever I may have said. I know that that may not be the popular perspective. However, I often and regularly say to my worshiping community, you better read that word for yourself, because you don't know what I'm saying. So you don't trust what I say, you confirm what I say. And if you have lack of understanding of something that I may have read, that I may have offered with a certain perspective, if I'm worth my weight in salt, I will make room for you to bring your question of whatever I may have said, and we may have dialogue, and we may agree to disagree. And that should be okay also. In my worshiping community, I let them talk me into wearing a robe one Sunday a month, because I never want them to worship that robe. And I want them to stay reminded, I'm a servant. I am a servant. And so don't let that robe fool you. And I also am on my journey. And I also am walking out my walk. And I also am imperfect. And never confuse me with Jesus. Right? But by the same token, I let them know, in the language I use is, if you see my slip showing, let me know. If you think I may have said something or acted out in a way that just really wasn't my best self, because in my humanity, I might have missed something, care enough about me, because I'm open to it, to just speak to me. Don't put me on blast. Don't embarrass me, but nicely pull me to the side and say, you know, you might need to make an apology there. I think that didn't really land the way that you wanted. But I think as clergy, we have to be open to that type of dialogue. And we have to make space for that. And we have to continue to invite the people in front of us, regardless of what your denomination is and what your faith-based beliefs are, that whatever your word is, you really need to know what it says for yourself. And whoever is in front of you, you need to confirm that what they're reading to you is what it even actually says. What a difference a few words make. And I think that's just part of the responsibility that we as clergy people should have, if we are really caring of our people that are in front of us, and if we are caring of our call, and if we are caring what we believe God has called us to do in our lane of service. And I realize that's not popular. And honestly, I stay in trouble with my denomination just a little bit. But you know, I just believe, just as you say, God has called you to speak certain things, I feel the same way. And so I'm just gonna have to trust that God will cover it. And if I can just save one person from a life of violence, I may have done all that God needed me to do.
That's good. That's good. Oh, I was going to call on Reverend Birch. I think something happened. Jackie, did you want to say something?
Yes, I have a question to just kind of piggyback, I want to say, off of what Mr. Johnny said about educating within the church. So one question would be, why do you think it's not discussed in the church? Why isn't that topic through the years haven't been addressed? That's for anybody to want to answer.
Maybe because it is still primarily a patriarchal society in this place of clergydom. And women, at least in my denomination, we've only had permission to pastor for, I don't know, the last 50, 60 years. And so I think part of it, and not that a patriarchal society has to be a bad thing, but traditionally it has lent itself to having a gender that is empowered. And if you have a gender that's empowered, that means that other gender is not. And I think a lot of it is it's a matter of power and control. And there is just as much of it in the world of clergy people and organized religion as there is everywhere else. Now, does anyone tell that truth? I don't know. But we need to. We need to, and we need to own it. And we have to understand, while we're supposed to be in the world, but not of the world, unfortunately, a lot of us are of the world. And while our focus is domestic violence and intimate partner violence in this conversation, there are a lot of other problems that are alive and well, with your clergy people. And while forgiveness is an important thing and grace is an important thing, there's a different level of accountability when you are at a sacred desk and you are feeding into someone's spiritual life, and what you say is informing some of the decisions that they make, and their understanding as being a child of God and what the word says and how they are beloved and what is God's best for you and what isn't God's best for you. And Jackalyn, you and your ex-husband, you were serving the church and you were already at a certain level of things. And so for you all to bring that to light, it was going to come with its price. And I know that you had to have had some people think that it was your fault, without even knowing all of the nuances on the inside of the complexities of any relationship, right? Because people take sides, and there is shame, and there is guilt, and there is judgment. And even internally, we may think, what could I have done differently to make this thing work, right? And so, as I offered at the beginning, there's just so many layers to this thing. It is not simple, but the way that we begin to simplify it is to put light on it and to speak the things that we do know and to own the areas of responsibility that we all have in the spaces that we occupy, and to not be afraid of the pushback, to not be afraid of saying unpopular things, to not hold people's feet to the fire. I mean, I know we don't want to blow up our lives and our livelihoods in the process. However, truth telling is the beginning.
I'm glad you touched on when you mentioned about the being blamed. And that probably has to do with the other question that was asked too, about if the pastor is the abuser, what do you do? When I think back to that question and where I'm going with this statement, when people don't know because they don't see when you go behind closed doors what's actually happening, they only see the outer part of that. That's back in my marriage, I used to say he was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I didn't even know that that's a thing in the domestic violence community. When you say that, that means that person has two different personalities, right? They present themselves to the world outside that home one way, but behind closed doors, they're a totally different person. And that's where that two personalities come in at. And so that actually makes the spouse look like they're crazy. Oh no, he or she wouldn't do that because we see them as a pillar in the community. I just can't believe that person would do that. And that's how, like along the lines of that question, where it makes those individuals feel as though, well, I'm just not going to say anything because nobody's going to believe me anyway. So I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. So thank you for sharing that as far as within the church, because I agree with everything that you said in terms of that too. And I think that's something that we need to get out of. And we do need to talk about it. I've reached out to different churches in Arizona and even here in Texas. And I got some kickback like, okay, well, you're not a member of the church. Are you a member of the church? And I'm like, no, I'm just a public speaker. This is what I do. Oh, well, you have to be a member of the church. And so that's a door that's closed, right? And why would that door be closed? Because we don't want that conversation within our ministry, right? We want to keep it the way it is. So there is a, that you get that kickback of trying to get in to share and talk because they don't want to hear that.
I was invited to speak on a Women's Day, not in my church and not in my denomination. And I spoke on this, and I invited everyone to just count off if every 1 in 3 and every 1 in 4, and it was a well-attended event, and they were offended that I would invite them to consider that a quarter of them were going home to situations that were less than blessed. And they let me know. By the same token, I presided over a homegoing for a young woman, 25 years old. She had 2 young children under the age of 4. And the father of those children, she tried to escape. He chased her down and he shot her in the house while those kids were in their bed. And I was invited to preside over this homegoing. There were probably 500 people. It was a huge, huge homegoing, all brown people. And I there said, if you see something, say something. Because had someone said something, we might not be here today. I mean, we might be here today. We can't always prevent things. But what if we could have prevented this? And at the end of that worship and that homegoing, it was overwhelming, the number of women who approached me. I was not even in Washington, D.C. I was invited to go to Philadelphia because the young woman was a niece of a friend of mine. And so my friend said, I would like you to come and care for this for us. I had women from ages 15 to 75, 80, who wanted to come and just let me know that they either were in a situation or they are in a situation, and what do they need to do? So, I mean, it's a thing, and it's such a dirty secret that it doesn't have to be. And part of the empowering is to make it known, because then people, if you let them, can come around you and help you figure out your way forward. So it's such a funny thing. Some people are very offended when we speak about it, and some people are glad someone said something.
I think probably the ones that
I think one of the reasons why
Reverend Birch? You there?
Yes.
Okay.
You
were saying.
Yes. I was saying, I think one of the reasons why it's not spoken out loud in the church is because most of the perpetrators of this are people who are influential in the church. And the pastor would not want to stand and regularly lose those members. So they find it very difficult to talk about it. And the second thing also, when Kent, you talked about interpretation of scriptures. I think most often what is happening now is most religious leaders are speaking their minds instead of speaking the word of God. And that does not bring any transformation, because if it is the word of God that is being spoken, there should be something happening. And if you are truly speaking the word of God, then you'll be able to address this issue. If you can speak the word of God concerning fornication at church using the word of God, you can talk about domestic violence using the word of God. But we shy away from it because, as you said, rightly said, it is very, very complicated. And sometimes I tend not to blame them so much also because they don't know how to go about it. Look at your case, for instance. Anytime you talk about domestic violence, the response is overwhelming. And you really must be, you should be strong and you should know what to do next with that kind of reaction when you are out loud And most of our people do not have that kind of courage to face what is happening in their church. Because the first time I talked about this, the reaction was simply overwhelming. And it follows you for months, for years, and it keeps growing. And for me, it is key that we train our religious leaders in this. It's very, very important. And that is why I think the system of the church is important. The way the church takes time to train the ushers, to train prayer warriors, to train different departments of the church. There must be a department in the church that takes care of that. And we as religious leaders, it's up to us to do that. But I think we need to start the training with us, the religious leaders. With women, preachers like you and I, it's easy for us to talk about it because we know what it is. But with the men, it is very difficult. So I think that is one of the challenges we have. We should be able to start talking about it at that level and then break it down. I think those are my thoughts.
You were talking about with women is easier to talk about. From the African context, have you had experiences where you actually got pushback from the female pastors on issues of domestic violence?
No, I have not had pushbacks, but I have heard things like, you are Margaret Thatcher, you are strong, you are fearless. Don't you fear anything? Why do you talk about things like that? Those are the things I get. And then I take my time to explain that the same power that we have to speak against other sins is the same power we have to speak against this. This might look more complex, but we have what it takes to talk about it. So I have not really had any push. I'm a champion of talking about separation. If you come to me, be it verbal, emotional, psychological, physical, I'm an advocate of move away and then let's see what happens. Heal and then let's see what happens. And on that front, I've had a lot of pushback, people telling me that is not right, it's not biblical. I said, what is biblical about abusing someone? It is not biblical. What is biblical about being insecure in your own home? What is biblical about being afraid of somebody who made a vow to take care of you and to love you and to cherish you? Get back into yourself, love yourself, know who you are in the eyes of God. And if you really think you should go back there, on that front, I have lots of lashing, but I am not stopping. I can't afford to stop.
I've had situations where I would have discussions with women. You know, if we were talking about any other topic, the room would be filled, right? The room would be filled. I made the mistake, I guess, one day of saying, okay, we are going to focus on sexual and gender-based violence. That particular day, you have people talking about, well, I have to wash clothes, I gotta do this, I gotta do that. So the people who would normally come to the women's group didn't show up because we were talking about these issues. And I remember having a conversation with one of my close sisters in ministry, and she was like, you know what, sometimes you just need to sneak it in. I was like, what do you mean? She said, you need to sneak it in. You know, you cannot be overt about, I guess, talking about issues of sexual and gender-based violence, you know, with, you know, sometimes with even with the women's group, because a lot of them are not ready to have those sort of conversations. You have a few who are bold enough to want to talk about those things, you know, so bring them together under a disguise of, oh, we're going to talk about, you know, maybe how to pray for our families, you know, call it something else. Just don't name it, anything that has to do with gender-based violence or domestic violence. And, people will be more attractive or more open to showing up. So that has been my experience.
I would agree with you on that, because I've given, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm
Minister
fine.
Birch?
I was just agreeing with what she said.
Oh, okay. So the only part, what I was just going to add on to what you said is, I've also given or hosted events like that too, and you do get a lot of pushback, or I have something else to do, can't make it. Oh wow, I really wish I would have known about this before. I got something planned. So what I've learned through the years with working with individuals dealing with domestic and sexual violence and being a survivor of domestic violence, the topic is heavy. Both topics are heavy. I think a lot of times individuals that have already dealt with it or maybe are in it, of course, like what you're saying, they don't want to talk about it. But I think also if they're not healed from it, they're definitely not going to want to talk about it, because the majority of times they haven't acknowledged that this is what they're dealing with, or they feel embarrassed, ashamed. Well, I'm educated, I have all these degrees, or, I own this company, I shouldn't, I don't want to talk about it. And it's not so much of the degrees, because as we know, we're in the work, domestic violence does not have a respected person. Anybody can be a survivor of domestic violence. Anybody can be directly or indirectly impacted by domestic violence in some way. And mostly if it's a friend or family member to someone, they're emotionally connected to that individual, and they're dealing with the emotional impact of domestic violence because they're on that emotional roller coaster with that loved one, right, as they're going through. I wouldn't say sneak it in terms of that, because you don't want to catch somebody off guard and then they feel offended, because that can happen too. I think what I've learned through the years is that when we talk about domestic violence with adults, it's a choice. When we talk about domestic violence with the teenager and a preteen, they don't have a choice. It's not a choice for them. And that's why I think it's a lot more of helping teens and preteens that are dealing with it, because they're so young, they're still learning, they're still growing. But for someone that's over 18, that's a choice. If she's still with him, she's choosing to be with that person. I think they forget the part of, you're dealing with someone that has either seen that in the environment, they're broken because of what has happened to them, and they become an adult that's broken. And an adult that's broken, making unhealthy choices because of their environment, of what they've gone through. And so even though we are in the relationship with that person because we love them and we care about them, we have to get to an understanding of what is domestic violence? What is the impact that it does? That's where the education part comes in, at to really truly be able to understand that domestic violence is impactful for a lifetime for some people. Some people never come out of it. You know what I'm saying? They deal with the PTSD for years to come. They deal with anxiety disorders or mental health disorders develop as a result of the domestic violence that they've dealt with. Then if they've been abused by their parents, well, this is the norm, right? So when I get into a relationship, this is just how it's supposed to be. And so that pattern continues, because we know that domestic violence is a systemic pattern of abusive behaviors, right? So that person is conditioned to think, this is just what I'm supposed to deal with. I can't leave this person. And as we all know, that the greatest number of people that have died have left from those abusive relationships. And maybe they didn't have a safe place when they left. Maybe they didn't have an escape plan in place when they left, right, of where they're going to go. And this person was able to stalk them and then take their life. And in some cases, take their own life, right? Because of unhealthy emotional attachments to someone, right? Or unhealthy behaviors in that relationship, and think, well, if I can't have you, nobody's going to have you. If I can't have you, I don't want to live without you, right? That's still unhealthy thought processes, right? That's unhealthy beliefs. That's unhealthy thoughts that a person have, and they carry that over. That's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. Is it okay if I just show the book?
Yes, but
Okay.
let's do that closer to the end because
Okay,
I wanted
so-
to address 2 comments.
Oh, okay. So I was just gonna say, the reason I wrote that is to help people, the family, to understand that, the impact of abuse.
Thank you for that, Jackie. Thank you for that. Reverend Birch, I have 2 questions in here, and it's actually based on something that you said during your presentation. Okay, the person's name is Bonnie Colley. And Bonnie, if I'm not saying your name right, please forgive me. Please forgive me. But regarding the comment that I made about, women not feeling comfortable sometimes coming to these meetings, she stated that sometimes they don't come because they don't believe they will receive the needed support to change the situation. Before we address that situation, the first comment that she made had to do with when you talked about the resource center. She said the way the resource center at the church level was explained. Oh, where is Reverend Birch? Okay, let's see. She's signing back on. Okay, there you are. Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
I was saying, she said, the way the resource center at the church level was explained doesn't provide an answer in the case that the abuser is a ranking church official.
Well, that might be true. The resource center is not something that is forced down the people of the church, including the leader, to utilize. But it's a resource, I believe, that must exist to those who are willing to go and use it. And then also, if the abuser is the leader, of course, how do we address it? I think we've talked about it already.
Yes,
so
we did.
Such a person, you cannot force the person, but there should be some other strategies of addressing such people. But the resource center, I believe strongly, is very, very important for the church, for information, for sharing, for information. I think it's very, very key for me because because you have resource centers in the church and you have books on every other thing but domestic violence. Somebody who can lay hands on one leaflet, the person's life can be saved by that, or somebody's knowledge could be upgraded by that. So I think we have answered the second part of it in many of our responses. How do you address such a person?
Right. Yes, we have. I think that was a major issue. We didn't get an opportunity to talk about social norms, so I wanted to ask you all if you would be willing to do a part 2 of this, because there are so many things to unpack. We have to talk about social norms. For example, Jackie was talking about when we were children and a boy likes you and he pushes you, pulls your hair. For years, we all thought that was normal. It's like, oh, that's so cute. But no, it's not cute. We're teaching that child to be an abuser. And that ties into social norms. And then you have also the other side of it, social norms based on our religious beliefs and in how we have been, conditioned religiously. And based on our views and so forth, it translates to the way we view women. What is the role of a woman? How is a woman supposed to behave? How is a man supposed to behave? Right? That also translates to toxic masculinity and all of that. So all of these things to unpack. And then Reverend Birch talking about interpretation of scriptures. How do we even deal with the scriptures in the Bible that are just plain? Like, it's the concubine, the Levite's concubine, right?
Why don't we just talk about how Eve tricked Adam? Because
Okay.
Adam had no personal responsibility. We don't
go.
even need to leave like the first man and woman on the earth,
Right? We just start from the beginning with Genesis of it.
or how about wives, love your husbands? And we never get to the part where it says, And husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Like,
Exactly.
put periods where
Again,
there are
it's right.
commas.
Or you should
in the
submit to
scripture.
each other. The verse before the verse before that.
You know, we put
Yeah.
periods where there are actually commas, and that's why we need to encourage our people. You better know that word for yourself, because my grammar might adjust things in a way that doesn't really give you the word in its intended format. I would love to come back and talk about social norms. I offered at the beginning of my time that culturally, while I was here in the United States of America, I wasn't living a United States of America life.
Right.
But I was educated here. And so it was challenging to see what my neighborhood, community, relatives, parents were saying is who we are and how we live and what's okay. And every day I'm going into another America with a different education that is saying very different things to me. And for me to come home and say, well, I don't think that that's okay, what you're doing, would be disrespecting my parents, for starters, offending the culture from which I and we come from, and to ostracize myself. And I love my family, and I love my culture, and I love everything that I come from and that my people come from. However, there was this line of demarcation, and there was a period of time where my extended family did not speak to me because of things that I was saying and things that I just was offering are highly inappropriate, and certainly to be associated with the children and be referencing the adults was highly provocative, because we were supposed to speak when spoken to. And if nobody was speaking to you, you need to just sit there and be quiet. And so I think it would be a great segue to our time together to open that door, because culture informs much. Culture informs much. If we talk about those whose descendants come from slavery, that was a time where violence controlled us and our behavior, and it also created a diaspora of the entire family structure. So generationally, are we still living some of that out? Some of us are. So, that's a whole conversation all by itself, no matter where in the world you're from. It is relevant. It is most relevant. We're going to help you get that doctorate, Reverend Brownell. We're going to give you all the material you need.
Right? All right.
And then we're going to enjoy your book.
Amen. Amen. You'll be surprised with some of the chapters. You'll be like, oh my goodness.
I bet you I would not be surprised. I will come with my pockets full of confetti, sister friend. So let's do it. Let's keep the conversation going.
Okay, well, the way we will do it this time is we are going to go onto the YouTube channel, because I really need to start building that up. Because it's supposed to be, I'm supposed to have a video out or something at least once or twice a month or something. So it will be the first one, continuation of the conversation. So all of you, let me know when you are available, and we will continue this conversation. Because now it's 7:21, and I want everybody to wrap it up with their last words. Jackie, you can talk about your book. Last words, and then we'll sign off. But friends, this has been very wonderful, enriching conversations, engaging conversations. I thank you for taking time out of your schedule, especially Reverend Birch and Johnny, because I know it's late. It's 11:21. So thank you so much. I am so grateful. Thank you so much. So last words, everyone.
A shout out for Seeds of Security, which is a Baltimore, Washington conference level entity that I gratefully serve. Our mission statement is the Seeds of Security, is an entity of the Baltimore Washington Conference of the United Methodist Church. We are a collaboration of networks and persons committed to educating, advocating, resourcing, and providing safe haven for survivors of domestic violence, intimate partner violence. And our vision is to be a source of healing for persons experiencing the practical, relational, and spiritual impact of intimate partner violence. And I want to say, if you know anyone or anyone who is listening right now, if you are in crisis, you may feel free to contact us at sos@bwcumc.org. Seeds of Security, sos@bwcumc.org. We have resources, we have contacts, we have a few things that we've managed to put together. We have a couple of fundraisers during the year just so that we can have funds. It takes funds to help people when they're ready to step out. So just want to give a little shout out to Seeds of Security.
That's wonderful.
Thank you for making space for that.
I will go ahead and post that on the Facebook page as well. Thank you, Pastor Cindy. Who's next? Last words?
Well,
yes.
So let me get a go because my battery is dying. But let me congratulate you, Reverend Brunel, and the rest of the sisters on this show. I really admire the conversation. I learned quite a few things from them, from the conversation, based on my own work that I do, working with customary and African leaders to understand the rule of law with reference to domestic violence. I think from some of the insights I got from here will help to improve and even increase the content of what I will be talking about when I talk to traditional leaders in my own setting. But let me say that we need to get to work with all religious institutions, not just the Christian faith, because the population in the world is not just Christian. We have Muslim, we have Baha, we have the Hindu, we have all of religion, and they all influence the population. Like Bob Marley said, religion is opinion of the mind. Then opinion of the mind, sometimes people die for religion. So those who lead as religious leaders must take it as a responsibility to ensure that their congregation understands peace, understands rule of law, and also understand what to do to prevent domestic violence. So thank you very much, Reverend, and I hope to be with you next time when such program is organized. I'm prepared to join you in the social norm conversation in the future. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Johnny, you're gonna be helping me spearhead that interfaith forum. So you keep putting it out there. I'll be calling you very soon. You collect everybody from the various faiths and stuff, and we'll have a nice little conversation about issues of sexual and gender-based violence.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
okay. Should I go?
Yes.
Can I have a go? Reverend Brownell, thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to contribute my little bit. I have a ministry on Facebook, From Faith to Faith Ministry, at From Faith to Faith Daughters. So it's a ministry for women, young women from age 35 upward, where the Lord does a lot of things for women, including domestic violence. We do not have a shelter yet, but I do a lot of one-on-one and hold hands and in people's journey. And by the grace of God, there have been lots of healing and lots of transformation. Women have picked up their lives and they are moving on. And it's so beautiful to see that happen. I'm a conference evangelist. I don't have a church that I pastor because of my career.
Birch?
So wherever I go, I carry a church with me. And in my work, I wait. And through it, we start the healing process and we start the counseling process. So that is what I do, and it was a joy for me to share with you today. I look forward to another opportunity. Thank you very much for to all the other panelists, my sisters. God bless you. And I ask for more grace for her to continue doing this work. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you so much, Reverend Birch. It was a pleasure having you. And I look forward to working with you in the future. You know, Liberia, Ghana, you know, right around the corner. So I look forward to collaborating on some things in the future. It was wonderful having you today. Jackie.
Okay, so I can be reached at rightconnections.org. So that's RITE connections.org. You'll find out a lot of information about the things that I do throughout the community, me educating, trying to do my part. I'm also an author, so I've written this particular book, and it goes along with what we were talking about today of the families, the friends, the loved ones not knowing about domestic violence and not really understanding why that person stays in that relationship. So I really wrote this book to help the family, to help the friends and the loved ones. Now, the survivors can be helped from reading this as well as can help men and women. But that was my main goal, because a lot of times they don't know and they're questioning or being very judgmental as to why that person stays in. And I think that kind of I know that breaks that support system that the individual needs, because they're doing more judging than trying to understand. So this is the title of the book, and it's a little backwards, but it's called Planning Your Escape, The Key to Your Freedom. And you can purchase it on Amazon and also on Barnes and Nobles as well. It's in paperback and ebook form, just in order to kind of, like I said, to help and to kind of bring a little understanding about domestic violence. So it's a lot of good information that's in this book. I can't take any credit for writing the book, even though I wrote it, because I give all the glory to God. I had never written a book in my life, and being able to write this book, I know it was nothing but the Holy Spirit that helped me to write it. But it's written in a way, it's in a conversational style writing. So it's a good story about some friends, and it just kind of leads on into helping individuals to really get impact information. The small word says a close look into the mindset of a victim, a survivor, and the abuser. So you get 3 different perspectives as you're reading this book of why is she in this relationship? How did you get in that relationship? And now you're a survivor, but why is this person being the abuser? You get different perspectives of reading that book. I've gotten a lot of good, feedback from it. So I just wanted to do my part of trying to help. So I also want to just say thank you very, very much, Reverend Banty, for allowing me to come on and to be a part of this awesome forum as well. I'm so thankful to be able to meet everyone that was here, and I look forward to any time that we can get together, a part 2, part 3. I'm open for any of them. When it comes to talking about this topic, it's dear to my heart. And I just feel like I'm a road runner when it comes to that. I'm just nonstop about talking about it and trying to educate, individuals about it, because it is impacting our lives, whether, like I said before, whether we're talking about it or not, we're being impacted by it.
Wonderful. Well, Jackie, thank you so much. It was wonderful having you. You had so much to share. So with some of the information that you can just add it to the page if you want to.
Okay.
My page is open where people can just, post whatever they need to post.
Okay.
Because I believe in collaboration. This is not about me. It's about getting the work done.
It is, right? Yes.
So if Pastor Cindy, if you need to add some information about seeds of security, go ahead, post whatever you need to post. The same thing, Jackie. With your books and even the work that you're doing with your organization, and the same with Reverend Birch. Yeah. So feel free to add some information on that.
Can't have too many resources. You just don't know what's going to be the thing.
Exactly.
That's going to be that lifeline for somebody.
Because there needs to be a collaboration, when we're working on these issues.
You better believe it. All of us have said there's layers to this thing. Yes. And so we have to work collaboratively, because we have to be layered as well.
Right.
Exactly. So yes, go ahead, post whatever you need to post onto the page. That'll be just fine. Well, next week we have some other speakers. So please tune in next week. We have Reverend Birch. Sira will be speaking next week. Yes. Yes, we had a conversation. She contacted me. I said, do you want to be on the panel with your friend, your sister? She said, no. She said, the flyers have already gone out, so I'll consider doing it the following week. I said, okay, fine. So she's going to be there, and Reverend Ratona Stokes Robinson will be sharing as well, and some of my spiritual sisters from Liberia, Reverend Monet Jewel. And then we have Reverend Stepter, who is a part of the Liberian Council of Churches. So next week is going to be very, very exciting. And I'm trying to see who have left out. So tune in, and then hopefully we can get together again, maybe in November. You let me know if the beginning of November works. For part 2, this time, focus on social norms. But my sisters, this has been absolutely wonderful. Once again, I thank you for your support, and I thank you for being here tonight. Have a blessed evening and a blessed remainder of the week. Good night.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you, you too.